Empires don't collapse from the outside. Every historian knows this. Every strategist who has ever studied the fall of Rome, the crumbling of the British Empire, the slow dissolution of the Soviet Union knows this. Empires collapse from the inside. They collapse when the provinces stop listening to the capital, when the governors stop obeying the emperor, when the people who actually run the economy, the people who keep the lights on and the factories humming and the trucks moving, look at the man on the throne and say, "You are killing us, and we are done asking for permission to survive." That just happened. Not in a history book, not in a documentary on American soil. This morning, while you were pouring your coffee at 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time in a conference room at the Fairmont Royal York Hotel in Toronto, 10 American governors sat down at a long wooden table across from the Prime Minister of Canada. They didn't sneak in. They didn't disguise the meeting. They held a press conference on camera with flags, with microphones, with prepared statements and printed agendas and legal teams and trade representatives. 10 sitting governors of the United States of America just signed a direct economic cooperation framework with Mark Carney without the approval of the White House, without the consent of the State Department, without a single phone call to the Oval Office. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Washington State, California, and Maine, 10 states. Combined GDP, 8.9 trillion. Combined population, 122 million people. More economic output than Germany, Japan, or the United Kingdom. More people than France and Canada combined. These are not small states. These are not fringe states. These are the states that build America's cars, grow America's food, power America's grid, and run America's technology sector. These are the states that decide presidential elections. These are the states whose factories depend on Canadian parts, whose refineries depend on Canadian oil, whose power grids depend on Canadian electricity, and whose farmers depend on Canadian rail to move their grain. And every single one of them just looked at Donald Trump and said, "You're destroying our economies. You won't listen. So, we're going around you." The framework they signed is called the Great Lakes Pacific Economic Continuity Accord. It is not a treaty. Governors can't sign treaties. That's the Constitution. But it is a binding economic cooperation agreement that commits these 10 states to maintaining uninterrupted trade flows with Canada, regardless of federal tariff actions. It includes shared supply chain coordination, mutual emergency energy provisions, cross-border workforce mobility arrangements, and a joint dispute resolution mechanism that bypasses federal courts entirely. In plain English, 10 American states just built a trade wall. Not on the border with Canada, around the White House. They are telling Trump, "You can impose whatever tariffs you want. You can demand whatever trillions you want. You can scream whatever insults you want. But we are going to keep trading with Canada because our people's jobs depend on it. Our economies depend on it. Our survival depends on it. And we will not let one man's ego bankrupt a 122 million Americans." The White House is calling it treason. The legal experts are calling it unprecedented. The historians are calling it the most significant challenge to federal authority since the nullification crisis of 1832. Mark Carney is calling it Tuesday, because Carney saw this coming while Trump was standing at podiums demanding $2.8 trillion and threatening to close the border and screaming about freeloading and disloyalty. Carney was on the phone, not with the White House, not with the State Department, with governors, with mayors, with the CEOs of companies that operate in those governors' states, with the union leaders whose workers cross the border every morning. He bypassed Washington because Washington had become the obstacle. He went directly to the people who actually run the American economy, and he offered them what Trump never could: a plan, a framework, a spreadsheet that showed them exactly how many jobs they would lose, exactly how many factories would close, exactly how much their state budgets would shrink if the border hardened. And then he offered them an alternative. Keep trading with us. We'll build the legal architecture. We'll provide the dispute resolution. We'll guarantee the supply chains. You keep your jobs. Your factories stay open. Your people keep their houses. He didn't ask them to betray their country. He asked them to protect their constituents. And 10 governors, including 6 Republicans, decided that protecting their people mattered more than protecting the president's ego. Donald Trump just lost control of his own country. Not to Democrats, not to the media, not to a foreign adversary. To reality. To the mathematical reality that the American economy cannot function without Canada, and that no amount of presidential screaming can change the laws of supply and demand. In the next 45 minutes, I'm going to take you inside the room in Toronto where this deal was signed. I'm going to show you the leaked phone transcripts between Carney and the governor of Michigan that sources describe as the most consequential conversation between a foreign leader and an American state official since the Civil War. I'm going to show you the economic impact data that Carney's team hand-delivered to each governor. Data so devastating that one Republican governor reportedly said, "If I don't sign this, I don't have a state to govern by Christmas." I'm going to show you why the White House counsel is scrambling to find a legal mechanism to stop this, and why every constitutional lawyer they've consulted has told them the same thing. There isn't one. And I'm going to explain why this isn't 10 governors rebelling against America. This is 10 governors trying to save it. You are watching the United States fracture along economic lines, not political lines, not cultural lines, economic lines. The states that trade with Canada are separating from the man who is destroying that trade, and the fault line runs right through the heart of the Republic. Don't look away. Segment 1. The trigger. Rewind 8 days. Because this didn't start in Toronto. It started in Lansing, Michigan, in the office of Governor Gretchen Whitmer at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, with a spreadsheet and a phone call. 8 days. Ago, Trump announced via Truth Social at 2:47 a.m. that he was imposing an immediate 50% emergency tariff on all Canadian automotive components crossing the border. His justification was the usual cocktail of grievance and ego. Canada wasn't paying its military dues. Canada was stealing American jobs. Canada was laughing at us. By 6:10 a.m., before the first factory shift in Detroit had even clocked in, the supply chain alerts started firing. Ford's procurement office flagged 340 components that would be affected. General Motors identified 287. Stellantis identified 412. Every single one of these components crosses the border multiple times during assembly. A single wiring harness, the nervous system of a modern vehicle, crosses the border 4 times before it's installed. A 50% tariff on that harness doesn't just add 50% to its cost, it adds 50% every time it crosses. By the time the car is finished, the effective tariff on some components exceeds 200%. The auto industry's emergency modeling team, a group that exists specifically for scenarios like this, ran the numbers by 9 a.m. Their conclusion was sent directly to Governor Whitmer's office in a 2-page memo. The key finding: if the 50% tariff takes effect and remains in place for 30 days, 143,000 Michigan auto workers will be furloughed. 12 assembly plants will halt production. Michigan's state revenue will decline by approximately $4.8 billion in the first quarter. The state's unemployment rate will jump from 4.1% to 9.7%, from 4.1% to 9.7% in one quarter because of one Truth Social post. Whitmer read the memo. Then she called the governor of Ohio, then the governor of Pennsylvania, then the governor of Wisconsin, then the governor of Minnesota. By midnight, she had 7 governors on a conference call. By 2 a.m., she had 9. By dawn, she had 10. But the call that changed everything wasn't between the governors. It was the call that Whitmer made at 11:47 p.m. to a number in Ottawa. She called Mark Carney. Sources inside the Michigan governor's office say the call lasted 94 minutes. Carney had been waiting for it, not hoping for it, preparing for it. He had the framework already drafted. He had the legal architecture already vetted by Canadian constitutional lawyers. He had the economic modelling already completed, state by state, district by district, factory by factory. Carney didn't improvise this. He engineered it the same way he engineered the Commonwealth Compact, the same way he engineered the CIF clearing system, the same way he engineered every strategic victory he's achieved over the last 18 months, by understanding the system better than the person trying to break it. He told Whitmer, "Governor, I can guarantee your supply chains. I can guarantee your energy. I can guarantee that every Canadian component your factories need will continue to flow across the border at current prices, regardless of what your president does. But I need you to sign a framework that makes this cooperation formal, transparent, and legally defensible." Whitmer asked, "What do I tell the White House?" Carney said, "Tell them you're protecting your constituents, which is your job." Within 48 hours, Carney's trade team had flown to Lansing with a customized economic impact package for Michigan, then to Columbus for Ohio, then to Harrisburg for Pennsylvania, then to Albany for New York. 10 states, 10 packages, 10 spreadsheets showing exactly how many jobs, exactly how many dollars, exactly how many lives depended on the Canadian trade relationship that Trump was about to destroy. Each package contained the same thing: a state-by-state breakdown of Canadian trade exposure, the projected job losses from the tariff, the projected revenue decline for the state budget, the projected increase in consumer prices, and then on the last page, a single paragraph offering a solution. The Great Lakes Pacific Economic Continuity Accord sign here. 6 Republican governors signed. Let me say that again. 6 Republicans, governors who need Trump's endorsement, governors who stood on stage at his rallies, governors who have Trump flags in their campaign offices. They looked at the data. They looked at their unemployment projections. They looked at the factory closure timelines. And they chose their voters over their president. One Republican governor, speaking anonymously to the Associated Press, said the sentence that will define this era of American politics: "I can survive Trump being angry at me. I cannot survive 200,000 people in my state losing their jobs. The math made the decision. I just signed the paper. The math made the decision." That is the epitaph of the Trump trade doctrine. Not ideology, not loyalty, not partisanship. Math. Cold, indifferent, non-partisan math. And the math says that 10 American states need Canada more than they need the approval of one man in Florida. Segment 2. The receipts. We do evidence here, not theory, not vibes. Let's look at the receipts. Receipt 1. The Accord details. The Great Lakes Pacific Economic Continuity. Accord is not a symbolic gesture. It is an operational framework with legal, teeth, and economic architecture. Let me walk you through what these 10 governors actually signed. Section 1. Supply Chain Guarantee. Canada commits to maintaining current export volumes of automotive components, aluminum, steel, lumber, and agricultural products to the signatory states at pre-tariff pricing. If the federal government imposes tariffs, the states and Canada will jointly fund a tariff absorption mechanism that neutralizes the price increase for businesses operating within the Accord framework. In practice, this means that a factory in Michigan will pay the same price for a Canadian wiring harness, regardless of what Trump tweets. The tariff still technically exists, but it is absorbed by a joint fund paid for partly by Canadian trade subsidies and partly by state economic development budgets. Trump can impose whatever tariff he wants. The factories will never feel it. His weapon has been disarmed by a spreadsheet. Section 2. Energy continuity. Canada guarantees uninterrupted electricity supply to signatory states at current rates for a minimum of 5 years. This specifically protects New York, which gets 20% of its electricity from Quebec Hydro and Minnesota, which imports Canadian electricity to power its northern communities. If the federal government attempts to restrict energy imports from Canada, the accord activates an emergency provision that allows states to purchase energy directly through municipal utilities, bypassing federal customs jurisdiction. Section 3. Workforce mobility. The accord creates a streamlined cross-border worker credential recognition system. Engineers, tradespeople, medical professionals, and technology workers from Canada and the signatory states can work across the border with expedited processing. This ensures that the factories don't just get parts, they get people, the skilled labor that keeps the supply chains running. Section 4. Dispute resolution. This is the constitutional dynamite. The accord establishes a bilateral dispute resolution panel composed of Canadian trade officials and representatives from the signatory states, not federal officials, state officials. Disputes between Canadian suppliers and American buyers in the accord zone are resolved by this panel, not by federal courts and not by the U.S. Trade Representative. The governors just built a parallel trade governance system inside the United States, one that operates alongside but independently of the federal government's trade architecture. It is unprecedented. It is constitutionally questionable. And it is, according to every trade lawyer we've consulted, almost certainly legal, because the Constitution gives the federal government exclusive authority over treaties and tariffs. But it does not give the federal government the authority to prevent states from cooperating with foreign governments on matters of economic development, workforce coordination, and energy procurement. The governors found the loophole. Carney's lawyers designed the architecture to fit through it. And Trump's legal team is now discovering that the loophole is wide enough to drive 4 million barrels of Canadian oil through. Receipt 2. The White House panic. Let me show you what's happening inside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue right now, because the reaction tells you everything about how devastating this is. Within 90 minutes of the Toronto press conference, the White House counsel convened an emergency legal review. They asked one question: can we stop this? The answer, according to 3 sources with knowledge of the meeting, was a long silence, followed by, "We're not sure." They aren't sure. The most powerful legal team in the world, with the full weight of the federal government behind them, isn't sure they can stop 10 governors from trading with Canada. Because the Constitution doesn't give the president the power to tell a state how to manage its economy. The president can impose tariffs, but he can't force a state to stop buying electricity from Canada. He can't force a state to close its ports to Canadian goods. He can't force a governor to fire a trade representative who is coordinating with Ottawa. The White House is reportedly exploring 3 legal theories to challenge the accord. Theory 1. The accord violates the Compact Clause of Article 1, which requires congressional approval for interstate compacts. Problem. The accord isn't between states. It's between individual states and Canada, each one signed separately. There is no interstate compact to approve. Theory 2. The accord violates the president's exclusive authority over foreign affairs. Problem. The accord explicitly does not address foreign policy, national security, or military matters. It addresses economic development and energy procurement, both of which fall squarely within state authority under the 10th Amendment. Theory 3. Executive order. Trump signs an order declaring the accord null and void under emergency economic powers. Problem: an executive order doesn't override the Constitution, and the governors are claiming constitutional authority. This ends up in the Supreme Court, and by the time the Supreme Court hears it, the accord will have been operational for months. The supply chains will be stabilized, and reversing it would cause more economic damage than the tariffs themselves. Trump is trapped again by his own actions. He imposed a tariff so extreme, so economically destructive, that 10 governors decided the constitutional risk of defying the president was less dangerous than the economic certainty of obeying him. And here's the detail that makes it truly devastating. The 6 Republican governors who signed didn't just defy Trump. They did it after their own state Republican parties begged them not to. Party chairs called, donors called, RNC officials called, and the governors picked up the phone, listened to the political threats, looked at the factory closure projections, and signed anyway. Because at the end of the day, a governor who loses 200,000 jobs doesn't survive a primary. A governor who defies Trump might survive a primary. The math made the decision. Trump's own base is choosing survival over loyalty. That is, the sound of a political coalition cracking. Receipt 3, the market verdict. Money doesn't do politics. Money does math. And the math this morning is extraordinary. The moment the accord was announced, US auto stocks surged, Ford up 6.2%, General Motors up 7.1%, Stellantis up 5.8%. Why? Because the accord guarantees their supply chains. The tariff that was going to destroy their production lines has been neutralized. The factories stay open. The workers keep their jobs. The investors keep their dividends. The market is celebrating the governors for doing what the president refused to do, protecting the American economy. Michigan state bonds rallied. Pennsylvania state bonds rallied. Ohio state bonds rallied. Municipal debt across all 10 signatory states strengthened. Why? Because the bond market sees the accord as fiscal insurance. These states just guaranteed their revenue streams. Their tax bases are protected. Their employment levels are stable. The bond market sees stability, and stability is worth basis points. Now look at the dollar. The dollar index dropped another 1.4%, not because of a foreign attack, because of a domestic fracture. When 10 American states signal that they will operate independently of federal trade policy, global investors see fragmentation. Fragmentation means risk. Risk means selling. And selling means your dollar is worth less. Canadian dollar surged 1.6%. Toronto Stock Exchange hit a new high. Canadian construction stocks rallied because the accord guarantees continued. Demand for Canadian goods from America's largest state economies. Carney's economic strategy is being validated by the market in real time. Every number on every screen is saying the same thing. Canada is stable. America is fracturing. Bet on stability. And here's the most telling indicator of all. The VIX, the volatility index, the market's fear gauge, spiked to 34. That's crisis territory. Not because of a foreign war, not because of a pandemic, because the United States government is at war with its own states, and the market is terrified of what happens next. Receipt 4. The Carney press conference. 20 minutes after the governor's signing ceremony, Carney held his own press conference in a separate room at the Fairmont Royal York. He stood at a podium flanked by Canadian and provincial flags. No American flags. The symbolism was deliberate. He spoke for 8 minutes. His tone was measured, clinical, almost boring, and every sentence was a precision instrument. He said, "Canada's economic relationship with the United States has never been with one man or one office. It has been with the American people, with the workers of Michigan, The farmers of Minnesota, the engineers of Pennsylvania, the families of Ohio. Today, the elected representatives of those workers, those farmers, those engineers, and those families have asked Canada to continue that relationship. We have said yes, because that is what partners do. Then he was asked the question. The reporter said, "Prime Minister, the White House is calling this treason. How do you respond?" Carney paused. He removed his glasses. He cleaned them, put them back on, and said, "Treason is the destruction of your own nation's economic foundations for personal ego. What happened in Toronto today is the opposite of treason. It is 10 American leaders choosing to protect their people from their own government. Canada didn't cause this fracture. We simply offered a bridge across it. Canada didn't cause this fracture. We simply offered a bridge." That sentence is going to be analysed in political science departments for the next 50 years because it reframes the entire narrative. It's not Canada versus America. It's the American economy versus the American president. And Carney just offered the economy an escape route. He didn't invade America. He didn't sanction America. He didn't threaten America. He just opened a door, and 10 governors walked through it voluntarily because the room they were in was on fire. Segment 3. The Psychological Breakdown. Let me explain why Donald Trump is losing his own country, not to a foreign adversary, not to an opposing party, to himself. Trump's entire theory of power rests on one assumption: fear. If you fear him, you obey him. If you obey him, he controls you. If he controls you, he wins. This works in closed systems. It works in boardrooms where he owns the company. It works in primaries where his endorsement is oxygen. It works in rallies where the crowd feeds on his energy and he feeds on theirs. It does not work when the people he's trying to control have something more powerful than fear. When they have data, when they have spreadsheets showing that obedience equals economic collapse, when they have projections proving that loyalty to Trump means bankruptcy for their states, fear works until survival is at stake. And Trump just put survival at stake for 122 million Americans. The 6 Republican governors who signed the accord are not courageous. They are cornered. They ran the numbers. The numbers said, if the tariff holds, your state loses between 100,000 and 300,000 jobs. Your approval rating drops to the 20s. You face a primary challenge from someone who promises to fix the economy you broke. You lose your seat. Your legacy is the governor who let the factories close because you were afraid of a post on Truth Social. Or you sign the accord. Trump screams. You get primer from the right, but your factories stay open. Your workers keep their jobs. Your state revenue holds. You go into the primary as the governor who saved 200,000 jobs. You might lose the primary, but you keep your state. They chose the state. They chose the math. They chose survival. And that is why Trump is losing, because his power depends on fear. And fear only works when the alternative to obedience is manageable. When the alternative to obedience is economic obliteration, fear evaporates and people start making decisions based on arithmetic.